Is Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door on Nintendo Switch a full remake? Yes. Let's talk about it. Hello there everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Botox Games, and today I want to talk about this entire debate, not just specifically pertaining to Thousand Year Door, but just this whole thing of what makes a game a remake, a remaster, a port, a definitive edition, a reboot, a reimagining, because I feel like the messaging from developers and publishers has become kind of muddled, and a lot of people, myself included, it's kind of confusing, right? Like, some games fit the remaster terminology a little bit better than others, but then people would be like, oh, well, that's a remake, and there's all these different types of words used to describe re-releases of video games, and I kind of just wanted to talk about it through the lens of Thousand Year Door, so we can start there. I think this game is pretty clearly a remake. In my opinion, by the definition of remake, this would definitely apply. They completely redid every asset. There's not a reused asset here. There's new facial animations, or models, I guess, or 2D Paper Mario cutout faces from Origami King and Color Splash and all that. It's running in what I would presume to be that engine, right? Those newer Paper Mario game engines. And the lighting has been completely redone. It seems like from the ground up, this is a remake. It doesn't seem to be using the original code from the GameCube version. But something that did use the original code from the GameCube version, in this case, is Metroid Prime, which Nintendo itself called a remaster. I think that does fit more alongside remaster, though, with such a massive facelift. I mean, that's one of the best looking Switch games. I can understand why some people would want to call that a remake. I mean, I think myself included, I've even referred to it as that at times, because it does kind of feel like a remake. It is a visual remake, but the actual core gameplay, the models, a lot of it is the same. Whereas with Paper Mario, it's actually completely new. I'm not sure when exactly the confusion for all the different terms for re-releases came up. I know back in like 2013 to 2014, that kind of transitional period between PS3 to PS4 and 360 to Xbox One, it seemed like everyone kind of just knew that a remaster meant a new version or a more powerful console, typically running maybe at a higher frame rate, higher resolution. These would typically include all DLC, for example. I think of a very prominent early example being The Last of Us Remastered. And not to say that there weren't these types of games on PS2 to PS3. You know, Sony did a lot of collections of like the Sly collection or the Jak and Daxter collection, but I think it really became prominent with the transition to PS4, and this is just how I've always viewed it, but I've always viewed ports and remaster as almost the same thing. Not quite, there are differences, and there are definitely higher quality remasters than what a port would be. A higher quality Nintendo remaster, in my opinion, would be something like Skyward Sword HD. In that game, they made it look a lot better, they made it run at 60 FPS, and they added new control options and different things there, little bells and whistles, quality of life stuff. That's a really good remaster in my opinion. But something like The Last of Us Remastered, or even like Tomb Raider being ported to PS4, I don't know, I always kind of viewed port and remaster in that context a little bit as the same, like, oh, they ported Last of Us to PS4 and it looks a little bit better. I'm not sure on the actual like technical specifications of any of like the 2018 Wii U ports to Switch. You know, that's when a lot of those came out, like Bayonetta, Tropical Freeze, Hyrule Warriors, Captain Toad. Some of those I would consider remasters. I know people just call, oh, that's the Tropical Freeze port, but it's on better hardware. I assume it runs a little bit better, but I think with Nintendo in particular, it's a little bit even muddier, because port for us, traditionally, as Nintendo fans, has usually meant a lesser version. Even just on Switch with like third-party ports of Doom and The Witcher, we know that means it's going to be lesser. Doom is a great port, and it's very impressive what, I think it was Big Red Button, it's very impressive what they did with that version on Switch, but it is still lesser than the PS4 and an Xbox version. Or even more notably, if you closely follow first-party games, I think back to the ports that we got on 3DS, like Donkey Kong Country Returns and Xenoblade 3D and Fire Emblem Warriors. Those are clearly lesser games, and they run worse, and they look worse. They might have more content, but they are less high quality. Therefore, they are just a port in a negative context. But port doesn't always have to mean a negative thing. I think that's just something that Nintendo fans have kind of had to just accept, as the Switch hardware is, you know, it was decent for a handheld in 2017, but compared to the PS4 and Xbox One now, it certainly I mean, even then it wasn't great, but in terms of getting those PS4 games and Xbox One games to the Switch, it is definitely a challenge. And the result is a version that looks much worse than on other consoles. But like I said, there are those tiers to remasters. Skyward Sword HD, I think, is a great remaster. Return to Dreamland Deluxe, I'd be curious to know how you all feel about this one. I think this would fall closer to a remaster. Same thing, interestingly, with Xenoblade Definitive Edition. I think that is a little bit closer to remaster like Metroid Prime, where, once again, I'm not a developer. I don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes with those games, but Xenoblade especially, I feel like, is just using the exact same code that the Wii version used, and of course, they made it look very nice in terms of an up-res, in terms of new models and all that. It looks much better than the Wii game, no doubt about it. They remade a lot of the assets, but they reused some, and they reused the gameplay, and they made a new UI. So it's, you know, that's what I'm saying. It's not cut and dry what makes a game a remaster or a remake. Return to Dreamland Deluxe has a full new visual overhaul, has new content, has a new minigame mode, and I still don't want to necessarily call that a full remake, but I don't know. I feel like it should apply. Now, a game I think we can all agree as a remake would be something like Link's Awakening or the Advance Wars 1+2 reboot camp that WayForward did earlier this year. And talking about what I think a lot of people are more interested in, the future slates of first-party Switch software, a lot of that is remakes. So there is one, though, that is a huge asterisk. So Mario RPG, I don't think anybody is questioning that is a full remake. It is essentially a visual overhaul, but, I mean, that was an SNES game. That's such a big leap from what it was to what it is now that I feel like that has to be considered a remake. They completely remade the game in a very similar one-to-one style as Link's Awakening, but they remade it. Another Code Recollection, I mean, that was literally a DS game and a Wii game, to be fair, but that was a DS game, so that's very clearly a remake. Mario vs. DK, once again, full visual overhaul, full new cutscenes, and all these things. And then we have The Thousand Year Door, which once again I would consider a remake of that game. But then most notably, we have Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, and I think this falls very squarely in the remaster category, right there with Skyward Sword HD, right there with Metroid Prime Remastered, because this seems pretty low stakes, not super high efforts from what we've seen, I must say, but it still looks a little bit nicer running in HD. Obviously, they're up-resing all the assets. It looks like they're improving some things, but it is a pretty bare-bones remaster, I guess, is a decent way of putting it. Whereas, you know, Skyward Sword HD didn't need a ton done to it to make it look a lot better, because it was just running on Wii. It just needed to be running natively in HD. Luigi's Mansion 2 was a 3DS game, meaning it looked a lot rougher to begin with. I think a lot of the confusion in the gaming space for the terminology of remake, remaster, reboot, all of these things two companies are to blame. Capcom and Square Enix. So for Capcom, they did these incredible remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. And while they remade them and they, you know, it's the same storyline and characters and general setting, I would argue those are more of reimaginings of what the original vision was. I guess on a very high, you know, level, Resident Evil 2 and 3 are remakes. I mean, obviously they are. Same thing with Resident Evil 4, although I think 4 is a little bit closer to the original version than 2 and 3 were. 2 and 3 are so different, though. And then the other one I wanted to mention was Square Enix with Final Fantasy VII Remake. That is not a remake at all. I mean, they remade it and then completely went off on their own offshoot. Obviously, I won't spoil Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I can tell you certainly that is not a remake. That is a reimagining, absolutely. And by putting remake in the title, you know, that's going to confuse a lot of people because they think that a remake needs to be this wholly new product when that was never the case in the past. And these words can change over time, that's fair, but I feel like in terms of Nintendo's definitions, they're still in that like 2014 mindset. And I think it's really interesting too that even developers and publishers sometimes, I think, get it wrong. I'm going to be completely honest. Now listen, they clearly know more than me, but Square Enix, once again, I have to mention them, last year released Crisis Core Remastered. They completely remade the game. Like, there's some remnants of code there, I believe, from the PSP version, but it has all new assets from PS4 FF7 Remake. It has new voice acting. They redid the music. The gameplay's different. Like, dude, that's a remake, and they were very clear in their messaging saying it was a remaster, but that's not what a remaster ever was at that point. The words have lost meaning, or they've changed meaning over time, and it's just interesting to see, you know, other parts of the industry, how they take these words, and then Nintendo, where Nintendo, I think, still takes them, like I said, kind of what we used to expect these words to mean back in the day. A remaster is a spectrum of games that could either look very slightly better or almost not better at all, just running on better hardware, maybe has some DLC included, but that's what a remaster is. A remake is when they completely overhaul the visuals and all that. But in the case of Nintendo's remakes, they still keep the core fundamentals of the game the same. They might not be reusing the actual original code for Thousand Year Door. They're keeping the core majority of the game one-to-one with the original, with Link's Awakening, and even something like Famicom Detective Club or Miitopia. I mean, they remade those games for Switch. But because they are one-to-one, and because Square Enix and Capcom, and I'm not blaming them in like a negative connotation, but because they have set this expectation so high for what a remake is with Resident Evil and Final Fantasy VII Remake, people then look at Nintendo remakes, or even some other remakes, like, I think Demon's Souls, I've seen some people call like a remaster before, right? They look at those and they're like, well, that's just a remaster because all they did was change the visuals. No, a remake is when you take a game and you make it look completely different. Super Mario RPG is a remake. Thousand Year Door is a remake. Mario vs. DK is a remake. All these things. Demon's Souls is a remake. Shadow of the Colossus on PS4, that's a remake. But then even within Nintendo, you could argue Prime, that almost qualifies as a remake. I mean, Nintendo itself is calling it a remaster. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting subject, and, you know, with this video, I just wanted to kind of discuss it with you all and get your takes on this, because I've seen so many differing opinions. There are technical definitions of each thing, but so many games have different kind of tiers to it. Like I mentioned, Xenoblade Definitive Edition, they made that game look a lot better. The character models in particular, they remade a lot of different parts of that game, but a lot of parts of it are the exact same. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. What do you think makes a game a port, a remaster, a remake, a reimagining, a reboot, all of the above? What do you think it takes? What would you consider Thousand Year Door? What would you consider Luigi's Mansion 2? I mean, it's an open discussion. You know, I'm not trying to be like, oh, this is what this is, this is what this is. I just want to get your take on it because I think it is a very interesting topic, just from Nintendo's perspective, but also the industry at large. Let's get a discussion going down in the comments below. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo content like this almost each and every day. I've been a little bit slower recently, and I will get back to it soon, hopefully. But until next time, folks, peace.